performance as a key element in human longevity today. So my name is Mike Jeanfavre. I'm an orthopedic and sports clinical specialist with Stanford Healthcare Physical Therapy. I work out of their hospital-based outpatient orthopedic and sports clinic in Redwood City, California. So a brief outline in today's presentation. So there'll be 5 parts. We'll start with a brief introduction. We'll then get into physical activity, the health span, quality of life, and the lifespan, and defining each of those as well as how they play into one another. The relationship between muscle performance and aging, and then most importantly, the actionable steps to maximize muscle performance for longevity, and then a question and answer for those that are attending this live. The objectives of today's presentation, that by the end of today, you'll be able to describe the protective benefits that muscle performance can have on improving one's quality of life, health span, and longevity, describe the impact of aging on muscle composition and muscle performance, and then have some guidance on the implementation on evidence-based exercise routines to maintain and improve muscle performance as it relates to health span and longevity. So what do you expect and what do you want out of the final decade and the final years of your life? Many Americans envision a lifestyle that allows us to enjoy retirement. Retirement brings wealth, opportunity, relaxation, pursuing passions, strengthening social connections, and enjoying the relaxation and leisure activities or hobbies that we have or develop throughout the other aspects of our life, or even learning new ones, pursuing hobbies and passions, and then spending quality time with family and friends. To enjoy the later decades of life and to ensure such visions and expectations become a reality, it requires aging with health, vitality, and independence. Maintaining health is the key to enjoying every moment. Today, I hope to convey to you how to embrace an active lifestyle and how doing so, with a particular emphasis on muscle and resistance training, contributes to overall well-being and allows us to experience fulfillment throughout the later stages of life. Health and independence are the cornerstones of having a fulfilling retirement and creating a positive cycle of well-being in our later stages of life. My hope is that today's presentation allows you to live a life where you are performing daily activities with ease, living on one's own terms with a sense of independence and autonomy, and maintaining a sense of freedom. For it's not just the years in our lives that count. It's the life within our years, as stated by Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so looking at physical activity, health span, quality of life, all across the lifespan. So let's get into some definitions, the difference between health span and lifespan. So health span is the period of life without functional limitations, chronic disease, and or disability. And you can see the figures delineating this here. So in the dark blue, you have the non-optimized health span, and then you have the age-related disease. And then in the graph on the y-axis, you have the percent of someone's functional capacity, and then age running along the x-axis or time. And health span in the gray is really that portion of life in which we are physically able, vital, and we have a sense of health and in the absence of disease. But then there's the functional limitations, disease, and disability that occur at a certain level of function. And there's a time point within our lives, usually later in it, where we fall below, our physical function falls below that threshold, leading to these diseased and or disabled states. When we look at how modern medicine over the last 30 years has assisted with this, really there's been minimal effect in that of the health span, but there's been much more longer functional limitations, disability, and disease. So we've essentially drawn out the longevity and the lifespan, but without truly optimizing that of the health span. And when you look at this in a linear fashion, you can see, at least for Americans, the average health span is around 63 years, but the average lifespan is closer to 79, depending on the sources that you look at. And thus, we have at least a full decade that is tapered with disease, disability, and not being able to have the same quality of life, autonomy, and independence that we once had. So really what we want to do is promote and find strategies such that we can have optimal health span. That is where we are living the majority of our lives above that threshold of disability and disease. And the most profound impact and one of the most potent means by which we can do this is through lifestyle medicine. That is diet, exercise, sleep, social engagement, etc. And then, of course, we still can leverage the innovation of preventative medicine and modern medicine to help fend off and even treat the diseases and or disabilities that we otherwise endure. And then you see it in the bar down at the bottom now. Instead of 63 years, we hope to optimize not only our health span, potentially even our longevity as well, while simultaneously shortening that marginal decade in which we are have compressed morbidity and or disease. Well, if we know that lifestyle medicine is important, it's also relatively important to understand what the current trends are. And so here you have a figure. On the y-axis, you have the percentage of the American public. And then on the four bars that you have running across, the red ones demonstrating that percentage of Americans that don't partake in aerobic exercise, that percentage of individuals that don't partake in resistance training exercise, and then the green bar is demonstrating the percentage of the American public that are actually meeting said guidelines for aerobic exercise, which is 150 minutes per week, or 30 minutes, 5 days a week, and or sufficient muscle strengthening of a minimum of 2 times per week. And so it's alarming that over 57% are not performing any form of strength training. And the reason being, and I'll make a case for why this is alarming in my eyes. And it's also a little bit sobering to see that only 30% of individuals are actually meeting the strength recommended guidelines. Sobering, but I also am feeling somewhat motivated by this because it means that there's great room for potential as we can start to educate, promote, and facilitate a greater sense of well-being, a greater sense of autonomy, and an overall quality of life that is full of fulfillment right up into our later ages. And then when we look at the adult population, but we actually look at the percentage of Californians, and specifically those meeting the strength guidelines, we can see that there's a linear trend where the younger individuals are in cohorts are close to 50% and even well above that of the national average. But then as we age, particularly in California, we see that individuals over 65, that only about a quarter of them, 1 in 4, are actually meeting the strength guidelines. So why is this significant? It's significant because when we look at someone's physical fitness and their capabilities, particularly their muscle mass, their muscle function, and their muscle performance as we age, we can see that there's a high rate of decline after age 65, such that between ages 65 and 95 years of age, our strength and our physical ability is cut in half. Between 65 and 85, there's over a 40% reduction. And when we consider maybe some of the causes or some of the conditions that can lead to this, there's three predominant ones that come to mind. So you may have heard these terms before. A couple of them are getting more, are becoming more prevalent, and there's more information coming out about them, not only about their implications, but also on the preventative measures of them. So you have sarcopenia, frailty, and cachexia. So defining each of these, so sarcopenia is the age-related muscle loss and muscle weakness, not related to disease, simply due to aging. Frailty is a decreased physical capacity and or resiliency. It goes beyond just the muscle mass. It speaks, and we'll define it in greater detail, but it also speaks to someone's overall emotional state, weight loss, and even their gait speed. Whereas cachexia is weakness and wasting that is specifically secondarily to an illness or chronic disease. And so you see the overlapping elements of these different conditions. For instance, in frailty and cachexia, you have weight loss. In sarcopenia and cachexia, you also have muscle loss. And then with frailty and sarcopenia, there's this weakness grossly throughout the body, and then there's a slowing of gait. And when you look in the middle, well, that's really where you see the decrease in health span, decreased independence, decreased quality of life, increased morbidity, and decreased lifespan with an increased death rate. And really where I want to focus today is not so much on the cachexia spectrum, but more on the sarcopenia and the frailty, because I think that these are the areas where we can make the most profound impact, though we can certainly make impact within the cachexia demographic. We are speaking solely of aging in and of itself, not specific to any particular disease. So when we map muscle strength across the age and or lifespan, what we can see is that there's a peak early in adulthood, right around 35 or in our 30s. And then we have a gradual decline between then and age 40 or 45. And then we have a steep inflection point at around age 60, where we have a substantial decline from age 50 on. And when you look at the percentage of muscle mass that is lost between males and females for each decade of life, we can see that there's a progressive decline with an average of approximately 8 to 11%. A little bit more profound later in life for the female than the male, but otherwise there's a pretty much consistent trend. And when we look at the gap between what our peak adulthood strength is and that of around 80 years of age, we can see that there's a 30% decrement. But what I'm here today to tell you is that this doesn't have to be. Aging is and muscle strength loss and muscle performance loss is not immutable. We have abilities to make impact and mitigate the age-related decline in our physical function. So that may be sobering in itself, but what if we consider in the presence of unexpected illness, disease, physical injury per se, where you're immobilized or you're not able to be physically active? So here in this final table, you can see it down in the bottom left, the days of immobilization. And then you can see the amount of atrophy. So if you're a healthy individual and say you got ill and with the flu and you were bedridden for a week, or you had a significant reduction in your physical activity, well, within 7 days, you can lose about 5% of your muscle mass. For someone in their 60s and their 70s, at least for males and even for females, this is almost close to about a decade loss of muscle mass within a week. And so it speaks to the importance of building up reserves. And then it's even more profound if someone is otherwise hospitalized, where you can lose twice as much, if not 3 times as much, within a 2-week span. And this is this is devastating. We really, it makes it very difficult to be able to recoup this it takes 6 to 12 months, if not longer, to be able to increase one's lean muscle mass and skeletal muscle strength after such a decline. And the reason being, there's several physiological effects that impact this. In particular, is that one of the things they speak about is the anabolic resistance that occurs later in life, meaning the difficulty to be able to increase our lean muscle mass and our lean body tissue. And one of the things that you may or may not be aware of is that grip strength is incredibly important and one of the most profound predictors of longevity and someone's overall vitality. And when we look at individuals between those who are just over 60 years of age, and you have in the light blue considered to be weak, that is males who have a grip strength of less than 57 pounds of force, and females that are less than 35 pounds of force. We can see that approximately 5 to 6% in individuals over age 60. However, when we break that down between different decades and different demographics, we can see that between 60 and 79 years of age, where there's essentially 9% of individuals that have intermediate strength, and then there's other individuals that only about 2% are considered to be weak. However, that drastically increases as we get beyond age 80. Once again, this is not inevitable. We have the ability within our capacity, particularly taking action early and often, can help to mitigate this. But this is a 7-time-fold increase in for males, for those that transition to a weak grip strength later in life, and then for females, 11-time increase. And then for the intermediate group, we have a transition, and you can see the general trend between 3.5 and 5 times increase in strength. So we can see is that this corresponds to someone's quality of life as well. So when the percent who say their lives are better in the next 10 years than they are currently, we can see that this significantly increases as we age. Particularly if we highlight the bottom 2 rungs, we can see that there's over 20% of individuals 65 years of age and older who believe that in 10 years their lives will be potentially worse than they currently are. And only a fair few of them believe that they will be actually better, less than 15% respectively. So more older adults see better years behind them than ahead of them. And I'm hoping to help to change this narrative, and we'll speak about the importance and the benefits that physical exercise, particularly strength training, can have on one's mental as well as physical capabilities and health. And so you have a similar graph here to that of which I showed with the health span and the lifespan. So on the x-axis, you have muscle strength and function. Running along the x-axis, you have age, and then you have the disability threshold in the red dotted line. The black line demonstrates normal decline in aging, whereas the gold line are those individuals that are sedentary, where you have increased inflammation, decreased positive body composition that is increased muscle fat, as well as decreased lean body tissue, and then there's an increase in insulin resistance, and you have an accelerated decline based off normal aging. Those that are have cardiovascular exercise have decreased inflammation, increased improvements in body composition, and better insulin resistance, and you have a reduced decline as denoted by the yellow and or gold dotted line, where you can see that they are able to fend off the time point at which they fall below that disability threshold. However, when you add in strength training and you include both cardiovascular and physical activity or physical lifestyle with muscle strength, where you have a synergistic effect such that you're able to actually further fend off what is your disability threshold. And if I feel like this slide captures exactly what I'm trying to capture today, and this, if there is nothing else that you walked away from, I hope that it's this, that the rate at which we age and the quality of life that we sustain is within our power and within our own hands, and by taking action early and often, that we have influence over our quality of life, our physical vitality, our independence, and our autonomy. A strength-based resistance training using free weights, either body weight, dumbbells, kettlebells, the modality does not matter as much as the consistency, should be used in combination for a comprehensive anti-sarcopenic and or anti-aging strategy. So when we consider frailty, as I alluded to previously, frailty is defined by weakness, slow gait, minimal exercise, fatigue and exhaustion, and unintentional weight loss. And meeting 3 out of 5 of these would be considered someone to be frail. When we look at the percentage of community-dwelling adults, we can see that 50% of them are actually in a pre-frail state. And why does that matter? And pre-frailty, as I mentioned, as I show there, meaning 1 of 2 of them, they're not. They haven't quite met 3 or more. Well, this matters because when we track these people, not only across time but also look at their resiliency, it has drastic influence on their ability to be able to bounce back from the unexpected. Specifically shown here, so you have the robust, you have the pre-frail, and then you have the frailty. And then you have time running across the x-axis. And you have the external stressor, be it minor injury or illness. You can see the robust individual, it's like a speed bump, a blip in the road, and then they recoup and they're able to continue on the same trajectory that they otherwise were. Pre-frail individuals have the same stressor causes a greater decrease in their physical function, and though they're able to rebound somewhat, it's not nearly to the extent of what their prior level of function was. It's about 50% less. And then take that same stress and apply it to a frail individual, where we can see that is very insulting, such that they have a substantial decrease, and the dotted line demonstrating once again disability and loss of independence. And then it's very difficult, if not it's an outlier for someone to be able to rebound beyond that dotted line, which is disability. And so frailty is associated with increased risk of the following: acute illness, falls, injury, disability, hospitalization, institutionalization, and mortality. But even beyond the frail group, considering the pre-frailty and tracking those individuals over time, what happens? So when we track them across time, we can see that 10 to 15% transition to a robust cohort. They're actually able to recoup and change their frailty status within about a year and a half. However, 20% transition to the frail group within 18 months. And then once you're in that frail bucket or meet that criteria, only 1% without intervention will transition to a robust group within 18 months. And so for every additional year that you follow these individuals, there's a 30 to 40% increase worsening status. That means following them beyond 18 months, there's a likelihood that the robust will become pre-frail and the pre-frail will become frail. And this is a cycle that we need to, one, have early identification for, and then also address. So a lot of this can be somewhat sobering. But the good news is when we look at strength training, compared to those criteria for frailty, is that it positively impacts 4 out of the 5. Gait speed increases, muscle strength, low physical activity, exhaustion and lethargy, all these can be positively influenced through consistent, regular resistance training. A bit more granularly at muscle mass and what exercise can do for it. So you're taking a cross section of someone's thigh, and you're looking at an MRI. So when we look at we have three columns. We have the young exercising male, we have the lifelong exercising male, and then we have old healthy men. The old healthy men are those that are free of otherwise disease but are otherwise sedentary. And what we can see in the dark gray is your muscle mass, whereas the white lining that also has some infiltration is a combination of connective tissue and fat mass. And there's significant more similarity between the young exercising male and the lifelong exercising older adult than is the old healthy male. And we can see that the old healthy male actually has a significant increase in not only the fat mass, which is shown in the white lining, but also the quality of the muscle tissue. You can see much more infiltration of the fat tissue within the muscle mass. We see similar things when we cut the calf and do a cross-section there. Once again, we can see that there's nearly identical means when we look at the lifelong exercising older adult compared to the young exercising male. Yet, once again, with the older adult, we have a marbling of the tissue where you get fatty infiltration, and there's also an increase in the circumference of the fat lining around the calf. So I've presented a lot of problems. Let's talk about some of the solutions and the ways that we can otherwise mitigate this. So here you have muscle mass and strength on the y-axis, and you have age and or time running along the x once again. As I stated, this peaks early in life. We want to maintain it throughout our midlife, and then there's going to be a decline, but how much of a decline is within our capacity. So the red line representing those that are regularly physical active, and then the sedentary individual. And once again, that black dotted line, a threshold of low physical performance that accompanies morbidity, mortality, and increased disability. And so we can sustain ourselves well above the threshold of low physical performance and the threshold of disability with consistent action of living a healthy, physically active, and strong lifestyle. So we've talked a decent amount about what is one's health span, but let's talk a little bit about lifespan. When we look at comparable countries compared to that of the United States, as far as how long Americans are living, we can see the age or the year of the consensus on the x-axis, and then you have the age in life on the y-axis. And there's been a significant decline gradually over the last 25 years, where the United States lifespan has drastically fallen off compared to that of other modern countries or comparable countries, such that we're living approximately 6 years less. So why is this? What are the causes? The leading causes of death in the United States in 2021. And you're looking at the average daily deaths due to heart disease, cancer, accidents, stroke, chronic respiratory disease, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. We can see that heart disease and cancer are far and away the top two, whereas accidents such as mechanical falls, motor vehicle accidents, and so on would be tertiary, or the third, and so on. But when we look at physical activity and the protective effect that it can have on our mortality and risk, is that we can continue to improve our all-cause mortality, that's dying of any potential cause, by anywhere between 30 and 39%. So the 30%, as highlighted there in the red, denotes the current guidelines for physical activity, where someone's getting 150 minutes per week of either moderate or 45 to 90 minutes of vigorous activity. However, there's still benefit to be had where we can get up to a 40% reduction in our all-cause mortality with consistently pushing beyond that, though there is some sense of diminishing returns and a plateauing after about 700 minutes per week. One of the most convincing studies that has recently been published that looked at approximately 2 million men and women, which is an enormous size for a study, and speaks to the rigorous means by which these statistics actually can substantiate the claims of muscle strength, is that we can see that the stronger your quadriceps are, you have a 14% reduction in all-cause mortality. And for grip strength, there's a 60% reduction in all-cause mortality for females and a 31% reduction in all-cause mortality for males. And this is a dose-response relationship, meaning the stronger your quadriceps are, the stronger your grip strength is, the more likely it is that you'll continue to live and continue to thrive. Protective effects that strength training can have, we can see that if you do it for 40 minutes per week, you have an increased life expectancy of 17%. If you do it for 60 minutes per week, you have an 18% decrease in cardiovascular disease. Additionally, a 17% reduction in diabetes. Muscle performance has a decrease in Alzheimer's risk by 43%. A decrease in muscle fitness leads to an increased risk of gaining 20 pounds over a 20-year period. Additionally, for cancer, we have a 17% reduction in colon cancer risk, a 14% reduction in breast cancer, and a 39% reduction in dying from cancer of any kind. More importantly, when we look specifically at the types of strength, particularly grip strength, so 72% reduction in or increased risk of dementia with poor grip strength, that is falling within the last 25 percentile of your age demographic norms. 87% increase in dementia-related mortality. For every 10 pounds of grip strength that you lose about 14% fluid intelligence, 9 to 12% loss in memory, 9 to 12% changes, not positive changes, in the deeper centers of your brain known as the white matter, and then a 12 to 20% increase in risk of dementia. Resistance training beyond just the physical ailments, for mental health in particular, it can significantly improve your mental health, increase your levels of depression, and improve your quality of life. And that's over 1,600 males and females across 21 randomized controlled trials. Finally, there's a decrease in leg strength, leads to a 34% increase in cardiovascular mortality. The evidence is convincing, unequivocal, that we can have a better life the stronger and more vibrant we are. Deal about the importance of living a physically active lifestyle with an emphasis on including muscle strengthening on a regular basis, that is at least twice a week. Now, what I want to do is give you further guidance on how you could potentially implement such a strategy. Barriers for the implementation of resistance training, and when we look at those first statistics, right, over 57% of Americans in the adult population are not even doing any form of resistance training, and only about 30% of them are actually needing it as far as twice a week. We know that there must be friction between this and the behavior. And we look at this as creating, developing effective resistance training programs, basic understanding of specific terminology, sets and reps and large muscle groups, access to basic equipment such as resistance bands and barbells, kettlebells, though body weight exercises, particularly for individuals that are new to resistance training, is usually more than sufficient. Physical limitations, including pain, prior injury, mobility limitations. One's self-efficacy to be able to perform muscle strength exercises related to activities. And entrenched negative social norms that come around this is that their risk of injury is greater when it comes to resistance training, and that people have concerns of gaining excess muscle and or hypermuscular muscular means or appearances, so more of the cosmetic. I will say that I've never heard it from an octogenarian or anyone over age 65 that they wish that they had less muscle mass than they currently do. We need to build the stock early and often, and it is less about the mass itself, though that's important to fend off sarcopenia. The strength is more important than the muscle mass, though they have a positive correlation and relationship, meaning the greater your muscle mass, the greater the strength usually. So there are, I fully acknowledge that there are barriers to implementation. However, being able to identify what your specific barriers are and coming up with creative solutions to help to reduce the friction is absolutely essential. We need you to love this form of training. We need this to be something that you enjoy and not as a daily chore. And the wonderful thing about resistance training and physical activity on the whole is that there's multiple ways in which you can do this. So find the modalities, the forms, the people that you want to be around and that you enjoy doing this, and then identifying your specific barriers and finding solutions to them, I think is an essential means in order for you to be successful on a consistent and longevity basis. So when we look at the parameters, and this gets to one of the barriers as far as like understanding of like the terminology. So frequency is how often. Sets are the number of cluster of repetitions, such that if I did 10 repetitions, put the weight down and rested, that would be one set, and there would be 10 repetitions associated with it. Rest is how long I should be resting in between. Intensity is like how hard should I be going when I'm actually performing these exercises. And then the duration. How long should it be taking? So frequency, we want to be doing it at least twice a week, ideally 2 to 3 times per week. The sets should be 1 to 3 sets. For beginners, 10 to 15 repetitions, and for those that are more trained, 8 to 15 repetitions. The rest should be 1 to 3 minutes between the sets. And then the intensity really can be moderate. It can be 40 to 60% of your 1 rep max. If you're not sure what that is, then you can use something called RPE, or your rating of perceived exertion, where 0 is not working at all, 10 is very intense. What we can see is that if you're working somewhere between 4 and 6 out of 10, that you're actually in a really good place if you're just starting out. That being said, for trained individuals, we want to try and push to the upper limit where you are over 7 out of 10 to optimize your body's adaptation. And then the bouts should be between 30 and 60 minutes per. And who are these guidelines coming from? Well, they're coming from a host of some of the gold standard organizations and institutions worldwide. So you have the American College of Sports Medicine, you have the National Strength and Conditioning Association, the World Health Organization, the National Health System in the UK, the International Conference on Frailty, Sarcopenia, and Geroscience Research in 2021, the American Heart Association, and then the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. They all are pretty consistent in what they are recommending for people's resistance training. A couple additional parameters. So what type It actually, again, the modality doesn't matter. A combination is probably best. We're using a body weight, free weights, and machines. Multi-joint movements, major muscle groups should be targeted, and multi-joint movements, again, are going to be more beneficial than the isolated. But there's a benefit for both forms of exercises within a particular regimen. The progression, so how quickly should one progress? Well, you should progress about 2 to 10% in your weight when you exceed the desired repetitions by 1 to 2 repetitions on 2 consecutive sessions. So if we actually translate that into actual practice, so if I'm shooting for 10 repetitions with a 10-pound weight, and I'm able to get 11 or 12 repetitions with good form on Monday and then again on Thursday per se, well then I should be going up by anywhere between 2 and 10%. I should be increasing the weight. And that progressive overload is absolutely essential for continued progression and improvements in the adaptations that we want to be garnering from resistance training. The tempo, so this is how quickly you're moving the weight. So if I'm going to do a biceps curl, it should be about 2 to 4 seconds up and about 2 to 4 seconds down. So when we look at the parameters of intensity, sets and reps, and so on, depending on the adaptations that we want to gain from our training, we can manipulate each of these accordingly. So you have strength, which is the max force produced, hypertrophy, which is the improvement or in the volume or size of your muscle mass. Endurance is how consistently or for how long you can a muscle can continue to produce a submaximal amount of work or force. And then power is force under time. So how quickly you can produce a particular resistance. So it's got a speed element associated with it. When we look at the parameters here, so for intensity, for strength and hypertrophy, we're anywhere between 6 to 7 and 7 out of 10, 7 to 8 out of 10 respectively. Endurance, we want to be working with relatively good effort at 7 out of 10. And then for our muscle power, because our element is speed, then the amount of intensity of the weight that we'll be pushing or moving will be less, anywhere between 1 and 6 out of 10. Sets and repetitions are going to be 1 to 3 for all but endurance. Endurance, again, is going to have a higher volume associated as we're trying to promote the ability of the muscle to consistently produce submaximal force. And then for resistance, or for reps and sets, or reps per set, I should say, is 8 to 12 for strength and hypertrophy, 10 to 25 for endurance, and then 3 to 6 repetitions for power, and this is because oftentimes the speed of the movement will decrease, even though we have the ability to continue to produce more repetitions, and we may not otherwise feel the same exertional fatigue that we do with the others. As soon as the speed drops by about 20 to 25%, we are no longer training or optimizing for our speed adaptation. I should also note that in recent strength and conditioning science has called into question these very finite sets and repetition ranges for a particular adaptation. They've actually shown that you can indeed improve one's strength and muscle hypertrophy with anywhere up to 30 repetitions. The important variable being is if you're going to use less weight and do more repetitions, then the closer and closer you need to get to training failure or form failure such that you cannot produce another repetition with good form. And then when we look at the rest per set, for low intensity sets, 1 to 2 minutes. For strength and hypertrophy, higher intensity sets, 2 to 3 minutes. For endurance, again, our emphasis is on the capacity to consistently do submaximal work. And so a shorter rest period has been recommended, whereas power will be anywhere between 1 to 3 minutes, once again, depending on the intensity. And again, these guidelines are really for novice and intermediate, or those that have some training experience. For the novice individual, doing it 2 to 3 times per week, full body is totally fine. Intermediate, 3 times per week. And for more advanced individuals, doing an upper body and lower body split multiple times per week, that is up to 4 to 6 times, has also been recommended in order to continue to garner the adaptations from resistance training. For those individuals that have experience greater than 1 to 3 years of resistance training, they're going to need a little bit different of a prescription to optimize their training. So you can see that the intensity nearly across the board, with the exception of endurance and power, are going to be greater than what you just saw for the beginning and advanced intermediate. So we're getting closer to our repetition maximum. For sets and repetitions, we're going to have greater volume for the strength and hypertrophy, about the same for the endurance and for the power. Sets and repetitions, so we can because we're using higher intensity loads or higher resistance, we can actually go lower volumes with less repetitions as we are pushing closer and closer to our 1 rep max for our strength and hypertrophy. And then for power, we're going to be anywhere between 3 and 6 repetitions. That really doesn't change because, once again, the emphasis is on speed of movement. And then when we're looking at the rest periods, these are very consistent and actually exactly the same as that of the novice and the intermediate lifter. So just a quick orientation to rating of perceived exertion when you're performing this. So you're looking at something called the Omni RPE scale, or rating of perceived exertion scale, specifically for resistance training. 0 is extremely easy to barely doing anything. It could be like a warm-up or unweighted or unresisted movement, whereas 10 is your maximum. You can't lift any further. And it will take you some time to kind of orient yourself to what is your 5 and what is your 7 level. One thing to help is repetitions in reserve, such that on a given set, if I could do, I'm like, I could probably have done an additional 3 reps. Then I'm probably working close to a 7 out of 10. 2 reps, 8 out of 10. 1 rep, 9 out of 10. And that was my max effort. There's no way, or I could have done another repetition, or perhaps I even failed at repetition 9 when I was shooting for 10. That would be an extremely hard set. And so this helps to kind of orient you as to the intensity without having to know what your 1 rep max is on a given movement. So what would this look like if we ran it out across a week? So arbitrarily 7 days of the week listed above, and this is for your first steps program, the individual that is just getting underway. Here would be a weekly schedule that may really allow them to comfortably get used to physical activity, particularly resistance training, and you can see those are colored here. And so I've also peppered in what you can be doing on the other days that would help you meet the recommended guidelines for physical activity, not only including cardiovascular and aerobic fitness, but also balance training. So on day 2, you're doing 30 to 40 minutes of resistance training. That is including a warm-up and maybe a brief cool down. And then you're performing a subsequent full body strength routine on day 6. So you're meeting your twice a week regimen. For those that have some experience with resistance training and have a greater capacity for this, they could not only increase the frequency at which they're doing their resistance training, still using full body like training sessions. So you're doing upper and lower body within the same session, and potentially even full body movements with multi-joint movement complexes. And then with your aerobic training, you're doing that 3 times a week for approximately 30 minutes. And then on day 3, you can see that we've split that evenly between your cardio and your balance training. And then finally, for your advanced individual, where you can be doing it again based off our parameters, anywhere between 4 and 6 times per week, where you're doing your resistance training for 60 minutes up to an hour at a time, and you have your upper body and lower body splits, and you're going to hit your lower body twice per week and your upper body 60 minutes per week. And even if you don't consider yourself to be advanced, if you have ambitions of being able to do an upper body and lower body split and working out 3 to 4 times per week, that's totally fine. You can certainly orient your body to what it feels like to use resistance training or external loads by tapering maybe the volume, the number of sets and repetitions that you're doing, as well as the intensity of the weight that you're pushing or pulling. Additionally, the individual that is a little bit more advanced could certainly be doing higher intensity training for shorter bouts on their resistance training days simultaneously to that modality or form of training that is also known as concurrent training. So a minimal effective dose. So for your, if you're just getting used to this, here's a outline of what a workout could look like. So a functional dynamic exercise, and you can see that I've partnered exercises together. That's known as supersetting. It makes it for a more efficient and slightly more effective workout, where you would do one set of one exercise, one set of the other, and you'd be going back and forth, such as a small circuit. And we have squats, which is a multi-joint lower body movement. We're using a wall for support. You could certainly also use a chair, and you're accompanying that with calf raises. A splint stance movement is any movement in which we are in a staggered stance or biasing a single leg. An example of that could be a modified reverse lunge, where you're holding on to a stable surface if you feel uncomfortable or unstable, and you're stepping back and then bending your front knee such that you're going to take a knee or go down to the ground. Hip dominant movements would include maybe a bridge or knee extension with or without weight, depending on what you have available to you and what your training status is. So one way and one program that has shown to be effective is a Body by Science protocol by McGruff in 2009. He has a book on it named by that title, Body by Science. And he has suggested that doing 15 minutes of what he considers to be relatively higher intensity, or that is taking yourself up to close to failure. It does take a little bit of orientation to do so, but you're only doing one set for 6 exercises. And I've thrown in actually a couple additional exercises here. And so what he describes is that you do these 5 major muscle groups or exercises as shown above. I've added the two at the bottom to make it 7. But what you're doing time sets. So you're going to move at a very slow rate. So 10 seconds on concentric, 10 seconds on eccentric, and then the key, one of the most important, is a 10-second hold on your last repetition. Right when you feel like you can't do it or get a full repetition, you're going to try and sustain that effort output for at least 10 seconds. Using machines helps with form for those that are novice, and certainly you can taper the amount of weight that you're doing and not go right up to the fatigue state or the failure state if you're just getting used to it. The American College of Sports Medicine would recommend that you spend at least 2 weeks getting oriented to resistance training before you push to that higher intensity. But this is usually a very safe, a very effective means of exposing your body and getting a very short workout in that is highly effective. And McGruff states that this can take you no longer than 15 to 20 minutes, and you can get really good benefits. And he has a substantial database working with clients to actually demonstrate their progressive resistance over time. And really your determination for the weight is that you can perform the set, again, 10 seconds in each direction for at least a minute, but no longer than 2.5 minutes. If you can go for longer than 2.5 minutes, then you need to increase your weight. By how much? By about that 2 to 10% that we had previously described. Here's a sample workout for a lower body. So this is more for your intermediate and for your advanced. So you do some form of warm-up, 5 to 10 minutes. Once again, you do a multi-joint lower body movement, such as a squat, and associated with a calf or ankle exercise that is less metabolically demanding. You perform a reverse lunge. Maybe now you're going through greater ranges of motion, and maybe you're adding just a little bit of weight, maybe 5 to 10 pounds. And then you're finishing it up with a single joint movement exercise. And usually your intermediate and advanced individual has either invested in or have given themselves access to some resistance training equipment. Examples of this would be knee extension and or leg curl. curl. Again, this can be certainly performed with either ankle weights and or bands, but I will say that eventually those training effects you will need to probably sealing out and or need additional resistance beyond just those if you're going to continue to have positive adaptations. Upper body regimen would look something similar to this, where you would have your warm up, be it walking on a treadmill for 5 to 10 minutes, you're doing a dynamic movement, increasing body temperature, priming the involved muscles and or joints. Your upper body would be an overhead pull, such as a lat pull down, or a horizontal push, such as an incline press. Certainly you could do a full push up if you felt that your body was capable of doing so. Then you're going to accompany that with pushing and pulling in the opposite plane, so a horizontal pull versus your vertical one in the superset number 1. And then instead of pushing horizontally, you're going to push vertically by pushing weights up overhead with a shoulder press. And then your final superset would be doing what they call a single joint, or also known as an accessory joint exercise that targets either a single joint or muscle group. And then you perform that for the specified sets and repetitions. Additionally, as I alluded to, is that on the same day, if you have the time, the ambition, and the training status, that you can also perform 10 to 15 minutes of cardio aerobic exercise such that you can get your heart rate up beyond 70% 1 rep max. That's a significant threshold because that's where the majority of our endorphins are released. It's also most beneficial getting in those higher intensities for improving your aerobic fitness, something known as your ventilatory threshold or your VO2 max. And then you finalize it with some flexibility, about 5 to 10 minutes, stretching out and doing some cool down for the major muscle groups that you worked in that given workout. Okay, summary and conclusion. So we've spoken about a great deal. Let's kind of wrap up, reflect off what we've spoken about, and look ahead. Spoke a great deal about physical activity levels across the lifespan. Once again, you're looking at 2 graphs, one for females and one for males. You're looking at the age across the x-axis, and you're looking at their physical activity level, how physically active they are on a given day across that lifespan. And what we can see is that there's a watershed event that happens right around 65, where there's a precipitous decline in our physical activity. And what we're trying to do today is to convince you that we want to try and be the outlier. We want to be as consistent as we possibly can into our final years and into our final days, such that we can continue to live a vibrant, autonomous, independent, and high quality of life as much as we possibly can. We also know that this decrease in physical activity across the age range or lifespan is also associated with a decrease in muscle mass. Exactly what we're looking here at. So you have your fat-free mass on the y-axis, which is a surrogate measure for lean muscle mass. And then across the x-axis, you have age or time for males and females respectively. And we can see that peak in our lean muscle mass early in life with a gradual decline, but then there's a inflection point right around age 75 that mimics that same timeline that we saw on the previous figure on the last slide, where physical activity also drastically drops. Though we can't prove causation here from just these graphs alone, we know that there's certainly a correlation between someone's fat-free mass and their physical activity level. And we have a better locus of control as to how we spend our time. And so the more physically active that we are, that's associated with a greater fat-free mass and a greater muscle mass. And thus, the greater the muscle mass, the greater the quality of life, the greater our autonomy, independence, and our overall functional capacity. Spoke about how strength training can positively impact 80% of, or 4 out of 5 of the variables that would otherwise classify us or an individual as being frail, and thus we have an antidote to this disease or this state of frailty and sarcopenia. About the fact that our gradual decline in our physical capacity is not immutable. We have complete influence over this, and though there are certain myths out there as far as and beliefs that we are genetically predisposed to ailment and or dying of a certain condition based off that of family members or other people in our lineage. We know that epigenetics, that is the ability to influence our genes, is highly amenable and highly relatable to physical exercise and physical activity. And we know that not just aerobic exercise, but a combination of resistance training and aerobic fitness have a synergistic effect such that in both of them combined is better than any one of them alone. And so we leveraging exercise as medicine is the solution to living a long and healthy lifespan and optimizing our health span. Meaning both aerobic and resistance training recommendation guidelines are associated with better health outcomes than either of the other forms alone, as previously stated. It's associated with a decrease in cardiovascular disease, hypertension, dyslipidemia, general health conditions including arthritis, COPD, asthma, mental health conditions associated with depression, depressive symptoms, anxiety, and the severity of such symptoms, as well as obesity and diabetes. So what are your lifestyle activities and experience that you want to enjoy? Universally, we underestimate the decline in our muscle mass and physical performance and capacity as we age. Thus, we need to build up our reservoir as much as we possibly can whilst we can. Consider not forecasting based off where you currently are, but rather backcasting. What do you want in the marginal decade of your life to entail? What are the physical capacities required in order to be able to live out that reality? Predict approximately about a 10% decline in your muscle strength and muscle performance per decade, and get a prediction of where you need to be at today to make those sufficient buffers and or savings in your muscle mass and strength. Account for the unpredictable. Financial analysts would say that you need a minimum of 6 months of liquefied assets for the unpredictable expenses that arise. Your physical therapist would recommend that you have an additional at least 10% of muscle mass and strength beyond what you predicted you would need, and account for the unanticipated fall, injury, and illness, because the ability to recuperate such faculties is not as easy as building them up in the first place. We need to optimize our health span and marginalize the amount of morbidity that we have. We hope that today's lecture and presentation helps to promote a more physically active and stronger life for you over the long term, such that the majority of your years can be spent on your own terms and in health and vitality. Lifestyle medicine is the best medicine, and using this in combination of preventative measures and modern medicine can further help us to live out a fulfilled life throughout the entirety of our time here. And so in closing, I leave you with a couple of questions. What is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Wherever the places, whatever the events, may you go with health, resiliency, and vitality. And I hope today's information and presentation help you to live the strongest and healthiest life that you possibly can. For the references of today's presentation, please feel free to scan the QR code where you can see a complete compilation of those references. Thank you.